Hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of 18 or Older Reviews. Today we're taking on the classic Western film Fistful of Dollars, which effectively set up the path for all Westerns to follow it. Let's get into the review. Fistful of Dollars is a iconic 1964 Western set presumably in the late 1800s. It is the first movie in the Man with No Name trilogy, followed by The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and A Few Dollars More, both of which I plan on watching in the future, but I doubt I'll review them. Also, I'm sorry in advance if I screw up any of the names. This film featured a lot of Spanish and Italian, both cast and crew, and honestly, their names are just very difficult to pronounce. See, there. The movie was directed by Sergio Leone, who went on to direct, obviously, the rest of the Man with No Name trilogy, and is now kind of revered in the Western, genre as one of the best directors. It was written by a lot of people. There are actually 11 writing credits on the IMDb page for this movie, so I'm only going to give credit to the top 4 that it looked like really did the most. It looked like there might have been a lot of on-set rewrites and such. The 4 main writers are as follows: Adriano Balzani, Mark Lowell, Victor Andres Catina, and of course Sergio himself had a hand on the script. The iconic score was done by Ennio Morricone. You've heard at least one of his songs before. I believe it wasn't in this film, but in The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, he wrote the wow, 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 which everybody has heard at some point, either, satirically or seriously. The film stars Clint Eastwood, Marianne Koch, and I don't know if it's Gian or Juan Maria Volante. Those are the 3 kind of most important characters. Really, the only one who obviously had a really successful career afterwards was Clint Eastwood, who is also iconic for his roles in westerns and being the good guy and everything. Weird bit of trivia or something interesting that I at least noticed when I was looking at the IMDb for this movie was that most of the Spanish and Italian names were credited as something more Americanized, which I don't feel like that happens a lot anymore. But if I were a betting man, I would say it's because they wanted it to reach as wide of an audience as possible. And in the 1960s, I don't think your average Joe was going to go see a movie with all these foreign names in it. He'd probably think it was, strange or whatever. Nowadays, it's more common practice to just keep the Americanized names, but back then, I guess it was probably just easier and got more butts in seats. I do recommend you see this movie, especially if you're a fan of westerns or classic hero tales. It's obviously been very influential in the western genre and storytelling since its conception. Go see this movie if you haven't, because I'm about to get in spoiler territory. I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the film begins with our main cowboy, who is credited only as Joe, though I don't believe his name is ever mentioned throughout the entire course of the story, hence the Man with No Name moniker for the trilogy. So Joe, or Clint Eastwood, rides up into this little town on the border of Texas and Mexico called San Miguel. And as soon as he gets there, he's tired from his journey, so he's drinking water from a well, and he sees a little boy running away from a house getting shot at. And so that's a weird, interesting way to start the movie, I guess, and trust me, it makes sense later. Joe rides further into town, and he sees nobody, really, out on the streets. There's a lot of people inside. The town just looks like a ghost town, and as he's riding up, he hears a funeral bell ringing, and the man who rang the bell comes up and says, hey, you're going to be next. Like, newcomers don't last very long in this town. Everybody dies. And so that, kind of piques both the audience and Joe's interests. And almost immediately, Clint Eastwood's character is shot at by some locals who, I guess, just don't like the look of him. They kind of just shoot around the feet of his horse, and so he rides away to the local tavern. And there is where we find out kind of all the exposition that we need for the rest of the movie to take place. Basically, the premise of the entire movie is laid out in this 5-minute scene, but this little town of San Miguel, Mexico, is run by two rivaling gangs. There's the Baxters, the Americans, on one side, and they do all of the gun trading and stuff like that. And then there's the Rojos on the other side, and they do all of the, I guess, liquor sales and stuff. They have a big wine cellar, and they also kind of con people, as we'll see later. And then there's Clint Eastwood right in the middle. And so Clint Eastwood is a bounty hunter. He's looking to make money and help save the people in the town. He talks to the local innkeeper, Silvanito, about all of the problems and everything. And so his goal for the duration of the film is to play both sides against one another and make as much money and as many people happy while doing it. So after their little talk, Joe goes back across the street to the people who shot at him. But before he gets to them, he stops on his way at the local, I guess, mortician, the guy who makes all the coffins and buries all the people. And he says, hey, get 3 coffins ready. And you're like, ooh, what's about to happen? And he goes over to the people who shot at him, and he says, hey, you better apologize. And they're like, no. And he's like, you sure about that? And they're like, yes. And then he kills them all very quickly. And this is when we're exposed to just how fast on the draw Clint Eastwood's character is, and also kind of the stakes. Like, people are dying already, and we're 20 minutes into the movie. And he actually needed 4 coffins. He does point that out. He kills 4 people instead of 3. But right off the bat, in one fell swoop, he's angered the Baxters, the American gang, because he just killed 4 of their people. And he's pleased the Rojos and gotten on their side because they didn't even ask him to do this. He just did it as soon as he got into town. So he gets paid by the leader of the Rojos. I believe his name is Miguel. So now he's in good with the Rojos, and he hears 2 pieces of information. And as we all know, over the course of the movie, we come to find out that in these parts, a piece of information can save a man's life. Anyway, so he finds out that, 1, the military is coming into town in a few days, and both sides want to avoid being investigated by the military because that would cause a whole hoopla and all this other stuff. And number 2, there's this real bad guy named Ramon who's really good with a gun. He's one of the Rojos, and he's not in town right now, but he's like talked about as being even faster than Clint Eastwood on the draw. And so obviously foreshadowing a showdown between the two. There's lots of, classic on-the-nose foreshadowing in this film. Ramon, the guy who's really fast on the draw, is also the 3rd Rojo brother, in addition with Esteban, and he's clearly the leader out of all of them. Even if Miguel pretends to be the leader, they all listen to Ramon. While Joe is staying with the Rojos, he overhears Esteban Rojo talking to Miguel about wanting to kill him, and he doesn't feel super comfortable staying in the same house as somebody who wants to kill him. So he goes back and stays with the innkeep, Silvanito. And that's where he inquires about a woman he ran into named Marisol. And Silvanito tells him, just forget about her. Which obviously he's not going to, and obviously she comes into play later. So presumably the next day, time's a little funny in this. The military rides through town, and they're pulling these stagecoaches that are heavily guarded. And so Clint Eastwood wants to figure out what's in them. It's rumored to be gold, but every time he tries to look, he gets shunned away by the military and its security guards. So he decides that he and Silvanito are going to follow the stagecoach, see where it goes, see what it's delivering. They follow the military convoy to the Rio Grande River, where what looks like a deal between Mexican soldiers and American Union soldiers, hence why I think it takes place in the late 1800s. He sees a deal going on between them, and he's like, oh, okay. But as soon as the gold is handed over to the American hands, the Americans gun down the Mexican soldiers with a Gatling gun, And that's when we figure out that they weren't actually real American soldiers. It was actually Ramon, um, and some of his other gang buddies in disguise who killed all the Mexican soldiers and stole the gold. And they don't leave any survivors. And so Joe uses this information to his advantage. Eastwood obviously makes it back to town before Ramon and the others do. He goes back to the Rojos camp, and when Ramon arrives, he talks about having the Baxters over for a peaceful dinner, because both sides still need to avoid being investigated, especially now that, a group of the Mexican military has gone missing. He talks of having peace. Joe is like, hey, my work here is done, I'm just gonna peace out, and he's obviously not comfortable with Ramon either, and so he leaves. But in all reality, he actually goes with Silvanito, and they take 2 of the dead bodies from the scene at the river and place them in the local graveyard. And Clint Eastwood goes to both sides of the town and says, hey, these 2 people are in the graveyard. And the Baxters want to go find them because they want evidence to put the Rojos away and take over the town for themselves. The Rojos obviously want to stop the information from getting out, so they're going to finish off what they started. So he sends them both on a wild goose chase, basically, because they're just going after dead bodies. So they go and they have a kind of lame gunfight over these 2 dead bodies at the cemetery. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood is back at the Rojo camp going through their wine cellar area trying to find the gold that they stole. And as soon as he finds it, he hears footsteps, and he already had to knock out 1 guard, and so he's like, okay, I've got to knock out somebody else. So he hides in a corner, and without even checking to see who it is first, he turns and pow. But he actually hits Mary Soul in the face and knocks her out. And so, being the white hat that he is, he takes her to the Baxters' camp to be healed and rejuvenated and everything. Meanwhile, at the gunfight, the Rojos actually shoot and kill the Mexican soldiers, even though they were already dead, taking a couple of the Baxters with them. I don't think any of the Rojos really die. And so they ride back to town, everybody goes back. As soon as they get back, the Rojos realize that one of their guards was knocked out, and 2, that Mary Soul is missing. And that sends Ramon into total outrage because Mary Soul is his. The next day, there is a public trade in the middle of town for Mary Soul. The Baxters, take her over. It's very tense. But before Mary Soul gets all the way across town, her little boy sees her. This little kid starts yelling "Mom" and runs to her, and she drops down and hugs him. And that's when Silvanito explains to Clint Eastwood that Mary Soul actually has a wife has a husband and son, and that's who we saw at the beginning of the film. They've been kept separately but almost together. Basically, Ramon saw Mary Soul and wanted her so badly that he lied about her husband owing him a gambling debt and took her as payment and prevented them from ever seeing her again. But they've been staying right across town from each other, and the little boy just wants to see his mom. And that obviously it doesn't sit right with Clint Eastwood's character, and he feels like he wants to do something about it. So Eastwood rides to the edge of the town where the movie began, and that is also where Mary Soul is being kept, in the opposite house as the little boy. And he goes in there, and he guns everybody down, and there's this really cool part where Mary Saul warns him that one of the guys is still alive, and he throws a machete and it impales the dude. It's a cool scene. He makes it look as if it were the Baxters' work, and he sends Mary Soul back with her family, and he tells them just to book it, and they're gone. They leave, they thank him, they're gone. So he actually manages to make it back to town, avoiding being seen by any of the Rojos, but they hear the gunshot, so they come riding. So he makes it back to the Rojo camp where he was supposed to be knocked out drunk because there was a big party that night. But as soon as he gets back to the room, Ramon finds him out. They had to go back for, the plot. And he basically gets caught, captured, and beaten to a bloody pulp. His shooting hand is hurt, his legs are hurt, he's in a bad shape because they're beating him to find out information on where Mary Soul went, but I don't think even Clint Eastwood knows where they went. He just tells them to leave. Unsurprisingly, Joe makes a daring escape. He kills a couple people, and his legs are so broken and battered. I guess they're not broken because they heal pretty quickly, but he's hurt so badly that he can't even walk. He has to crawl through town, leading to this cool scene where he's crawling away from everybody, just narrowly avoiding being captured. It's one of those where they walk past him and just happen to not see him or turn at just the right moment or whatever. And the Rojos tear the town apart trying to find him. They set up a perimeter. They start questioning everybody in every single house. They beat Silvanito. Silvanito doesn't know where he is because they think that he's hiding with him, obviously, because they were friends. So the next logical conclusion is to go to the Baxters. Well, while the Rojos are riding to the Baxters, Joe goes to the mortician and has him kind of take him out of town in a coffin. Well, before they get out of town, they stop to watch the Rojos handiwork at the Baxter house. And since the Rojos think that Clint Eastwood is in there, they burn the house down and they shoot everybody, man, woman, child, armed, unarmed, who comes out of the fire. They shoot everybody. And this is when we get to see really how evil all of the Rojos are. I mean, we knew that Ramon was bad. Esteban talked a big game the whole time, but we haven't really seen him do anything. But this is where, they're just shooting people who are fleeing from burning alive. And Clint Eastwood is obviously angry, but he can't do anything about it. So the mortician takes him to hide out in an old mine for a few days. When he's in the mine, he's taking his time to recover, to heal. He tests his shooting hand out. He's flexing it. He's shooting this big metal sheet, and he notices that the bullets aren't going through. Finally is at full capacity, or almost, and the mortician comes back and says, hey, Silvanito is going to be killed because they think that he knows where you are, so they're going to kill him and they're trying to draw you out. Here's some dynamite, let's go get him. Clint Eastwood rides back into town right as they're about to kill Silvanito, and he starts walking towards Ramon, and Ramon keeps shooting him with his rifle, and he keeps getting knocked down, but he gets back up again. You're never going to keep him down. So he keeps getting shot, and he keeps getting back up because he's wearing the metal under his poncho, the bulletproof metal, and he throws that off before the duel. Clint Eastwood keeps walking, keeps getting shot, but he's not stopping. And then as soon as Ramon is empty, Eastwood just kills everybody around Ramon, leaving Ramon alive. And so Ramon's entire family basically is decimated by Clint Eastwood, who won't die in 5 seconds. Ramon is shaken. And earlier in the movie, they had a conversation about how a man with a pistol will never outdraw a man with a rifle. Clint Eastwood wants to put that to the test. So he takes out one bullet and throws his gun on the ground. And he tells Ramon to do the same. And he says, let's see if it's true. They race down to the ground to load their guns and fire. Eastwood, obviously, it's close, but it's not. Kills Ramon. Ramon's dead. Clint Eastwood's happy. He's saved Silvanito in the process, and he's actually about to just, chill out because he thought he won. And Silvanito shoots Esteban, who was hiding with, a gun in, a building. And so Silvanito actually is the real hero, if you think about it. And so Clint Eastwood's work is finally done, and he rides out of town onto the next adventure, bookending where the movie began with him riding into town. The pros, the music was amazing. Ennio Morricone can do no wrong. He finally won his Oscar 2 years ago for Hateful Eight. This music isn't even as iconic as some of the rest of it in the series, but you notice it, and I don't really ever notice original scores in movies as much. I mean, I do, but it's just never at the front, but this definitely was. The plot was a lot better than I was expecting. It still manages to be a classic Western, but it does some things differently. For instance, the good guy doesn't get with the girl. I mean, there's only one girl in the story, and he doesn't get with her. He sends her back with his family, which I thought was great. I thought you know, somehow their family would end up dying and they'd end up together, but that doesn't happen. But it still has the classic, like, good guys beat bad guys message of the westerns of the era. Similarly, it has the western camp that's to be expected from older westerns. They do the thing where they didn't really have squibs or fake blood, so when people get shot, they just, like, and die. Like, it's super overacted and corny, but honestly, that's one of my favorite parts about westerns, is the, like, over-the-top deaths. I just think it adds some more character to the movies and separates them. The cons, some of the action, like I said, the graveyard shootout was pretty lackluster. Like, I mean, I guess it was kind of realistic, but it was really just two people hiding behind rocks shooting at one another. There wasn't really much choreography. It didn't feel like there were many stakes. The scenes with Clint Eastwood fighting were cool, but anytime he wasn't fighting and there was action going on, it was kind of lame. Or, you know, him getting beaten up was kind of lame, just the way it was blocked. This isn't... I guess I can't really blame it because it's kind of how the era was, but for the sake of the plot, they talk about how all the women in the town are widows, so you'd think there'd be a lot more women in the story, but there's really only two. There's the woman in the Baxter camp and the woman in the Rojo camp, Marisol. And I thought there'd be more women because basically all their husbands are dead, but it's basically only men in the story, which is a little weird. Also, the dubbing is really bad in this film, which, if I had to guess, they probably shot everything on film without recording audio and then tried their best to say the lines exactly the same afterwards. I know that's how other films were filmed, especially around this time, because technology wasn't what it was today. However, it was still distracting. You get used to it, but there were moments where it was just way off, and it was honestly kind of laughable, but I'm not a big fan of that style. My favorite part of the film is the, like, prison escape that Clint Eastwood has towards the end of the film, where he's crawling through town. It reminded me so much of, like, the scripted video game sequences and stuff where you're having to use stealth and you, like, avoid, like, everything just happens so perfectly that you avoid being spotted until, you know, you're supposed to. I really enjoyed that part. Does it hold up? Yes, this movie is practically timeless with, you know, the message and the story and everything. The only thing that keeps it from being, like, I guess, truly acceptable in a modern setting are the dubbing, which, as we said, is kind of a restraint of the time period, and the effects, which I don't feel are as much. There were some, you know, when it was a close-up on a dead body in certain cases, the blood just did not look real. It looked like jelly, which I still feel like they probably had corn syrup and red dye in the 60s. Like, they probably could have done a little better. So that's the end of the review. Thank you guys for watching. Next month's episode will be The Manchurian Candidate. I'm finally going to do it. We're going to talk about a movie that Frank Sinatra is in. But then we'll move on to other stuff. I just feel like I've been putting that off for a really long time. So July is The Manchurian Candidate. Thank you all for watching. Please make sure to subscribe. Follow me on social media. I have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Subscribe, like, share, comment, dislike, like. I don't care. Just get my name out there. I think that's all I have for you guys. See ya.